All right, folks, while students of color make up half of the American student population, only 17% of teachers are minorities. That means that millions of our children are being taught by folks who don't look like them and may not understand where they're coming from. Educator and author Chris Emdin has some practical advice for teachers who want to more effectively teach and reach black urban students, or actually any students, urban communities. He's the author of the book For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood and the Rest of Y'all Too, Reality, Pedagogy, and Urban Education. Here's one piece of advice from the book. Quote, to be in touch with the community, one has to enter into the physical places where the students live and work to be invited into the emotional latent spaces the youth inhabit. Chris, what the hell does that mean?
It means a whole lot, to be honest with you. But it means that if you have teachers who are going to teach in urban spaces or in urban communities, that we have to have a concerted effort to ensure that they live and are embedded in those communities, that they go to the church, they go to the barbershop, they understand who the students are. Because what oftentimes happens in schools is the kids enact different forms of themselves in school that run contrary to who they are in the community. So if the teacher sees them in the community and authentically recognizes who they are there, then has a different approach to be able to teach and engage with them.
And when we talk about what's happening, I mean, one of the things is you often hear from students, they don't really understand me.
Right.
But when you have a traditional school system that is about cookie cutter, teachers will say, well, that makes it difficult for us to do what we do because there's sort of this set way that we actually have to reach and teach.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss if I even bring in the last conversation we had about public schools and charter schools, et cetera. Across schools, there's an approach to teaching and learning that fundamentally is opposed to the way that youth engage in spaces outside of schools. So this idea of cookie cutter is just about people teach the way they've been taught. Even if they have good intentions about what to do in schools, they teach the way that the teachers who taught them, that did violence on them, to the next generation. And
when you say did violence on them, why do you say that?
Because it's emotional violence. In some instances, it's physical violence. We saw an example earlier. And violence to me is both a physical and symbolic thing. If there's a way I engage in the world, and you spend half the time that you're supposed to be using teaching me, telling me that has no value, that's violent. If you spend half the time telling me to pull my pants up and having a conversation about the fact that I might have some more complex understanding of the subject matter, and then you do that for so long that you disengage me from the teaching and learning, that's violence. And I think we have to use words like violence when we describe what's happening in schools.
When we talk about how do we reach folks, I look at how the KIPP charter network was built. Actually, one of the teachers heard all of this noise coming from, one of the co-founders of KIPP, heard all this noise coming from the other side of the hall. He goes over and realizes there's this black teacher who is using rap and music, teaching the kids math and English. And he's standing there watching this, and all of a sudden has this epiphany and realizes that, wait a minute, the way I've been teaching didn't get even that same effect. He literally saw kids who were normally quiet in the classroom all of a sudden talkative, up in movement, and realized, wow, she was reaching them in a totally different way.
Right.
That to me, and actually that's what formed the foundation of KIPP being launched, that to me is an example of how you say, look, I don't care what different ways I'm using to teach. If it's working and I can reach the kids in a unique way, go with it.
Right. I mean, I firmly believe in that, right? So the interesting thing about this narrative you described is that this teacher was a teacher in a public school who saw a teacher in a public school doing something that was amazing and said, I'm going to go start a set of charter schools using the approaches of the teacher I saw in a public school, but yet we have a larger conversation demonizing a public school as if they have no value at all. And it's not a public charter argument, it's a teaching and learning argument, right? You can't say that you see magic happening in a particular classroom and then demonize that space, use that approach and create a construct around it that may very well lead to privatization, that may very well lead to overfunding of people's private pockets to those young people. So my issue is this. Look, the bottom line is teaching and learning. That magic that teacher saw that they wanted to create and make their school of their own can be transformed across schools. There are deliberate, specific ways to be able to do that, which I call forth in this book. And if we start focusing more on the nature of teaching and learning and to prepare folks, we'd be better served collectively.
For me, so I worked 7 years in the school district of Philadelphia, and one of the things I noticed with students that they would say they don't understand how curriculum plays a role in their everyday life. They don't understand how that plays a role in how they walk down the street, how they interact with their friends. And so for me, how do teachers, both white and black, make curriculum realistic for students who have to deal with so much baggage walking into the classroom as it is?
Well, it requires a recognition of the fact that what the student said is everything. Yeah. Look, in the United States, the point in time where folks of color were the most successful and measures for success was actually pre-integration. So we integrated schools, but we never integrated the curriculum. So we have to look at what happened in those schools that made them successful for those populations. But what happened was project-based learning. Yeah. Look, if the roof was broken and we couldn't hire somebody to come fix the roof, guess who's going to fix the roof? The kids were, and the community was. And then they were going to teach math and science and English through that. So this idea of a project-based, hands-on approach to teaching and learning has worked for folks of color historically for a very long time. In today's system, where we're hyper-focused on college preparation and think that college preparation means drill and kill, and not realizing that drill and kill, or the goals of drill and kill, could be accomplished through different ways, then we exclude out this method that's worked historically for a very long time successfully. So what I try to iron out in the book is say, listen, why don't we go back to the basics of what we know fundamentally works for these populations, a recognition of the fact that youth of color are different. They're different does not mean that they're deficient. Let's find approaches that focus on that difference and lead them to the same goals that we want for all of them, which is to be academically successful.
Can you also speak to how the dynamic of not understanding black youth can lead to the school to prison pipeline, and how teachers have certain perceptions of students based on how they talk, how they carry themselves?
Well, you know, I have a section in the book. I'm doing a bunch of book promo, but it's all good. But I have a section in the book where I'm talking about a young person who was suspended by a teacher for being unprepared for class and always late. And so there was a meeting in the principal's office, and there's a young lady, the principal, and the teacher. And the teacher said, she's always late, she's always distracting, and she's never prepared for class. And the young person said nothing, and she started getting upset. Visibly, she's moving her leg and shaking the table. She gets the slip, she's suspended, she walks out, she barges out of the room. I go find her in the hallway and have a conversation with her, and she said, the teacher's lying. I say, it's a blatant different views of the same scenario. How are you saying the teacher's lying and the teacher's saying this is what's happening? And I start talking to her, and she's saying, look, I was standing by the doorway. I wasn't late. If I needed papers and pen, I could ask my homegirl. She was going to have that for me. I was prepared. So it's this idea of the community ways of knowing and being. It's like being on the block and saying what's up to your friend. You're still ready to go in the building. That gets applied into the school settings as well. A teacher who doesn't recognize that this is a part of just the ways of knowing and being and expressing of this population will view that as negative, will suspend the young lady who actually was prepared and wanted to learn. She's actually one of the few kids in the class who wanted to learn something. But because her ways of engaging were different from the ways of recognition of brilliance of the teacher, it was perceived as the inability or unwillingness to want to be prepared for class.
Question. I think you draw a really good parallel when you talk about teachers needing to be involved in the community, being there. I had back in high school teachers that would show up at the house and come out and hang with you essentially just to get to know the family. But what about those teachers that may be good teachers from the suburbs of inner city and they don't have the same ability to spend that kind of time? How do you define that? What is your take on that?
My take is quite simple.
Okay.
If you're working in urban spaces with young people of color who have not been engaging in teaching and learning, you better have the time. And if you have the time to stay in the school building till 5 o'clock writing extra lesson plans and the lesson plan ain't working, why spend the time in lesson plans? Spend that same amount of time going to other communities. So what I'm arguing for here is it's really just a recalibration of what it is that we already do, right? You're spending the time anyway. So spend it differently and preparing differently. And that's one of the main things I'm trying to push forth here, because it's really not a time issue.
So how does standardized tests play a role when teachers have to constantly prepare students for test after test that doesn't actually apply to real knowledge that they need in the everyday life?
The biggest lie that have been told to people who teach young people of color is that you need to prepare for standardized tests with a very unitary way. We doing drill and kill for a test that the kids underperform in. And you ask them, what did you do last year? We did a lot of more intensive drill and kill and bought more curriculum for them to learn how to sit in their seats. And what did you do the year before that? And what were the results? The students are still underperforming. So the perception that to prepare for a test requires using test-based approaches is fundamentally flawed. If you want kids to be successful on a test, you might have to use a different approach to get them to be successful on the test. If a young person feels like they're emotionally invested in success on the exam, they'll be successful. I have kids tell me, I'm not passing their test. When a kid says, I ain't passing their test, I know it doesn't matter what you do because they believe it to be your test. If a kid says, I'm going to work hard on my test, or we got the test at the end of the school year, that emotional investment alone pays dividends on their academic success.
I got 45 seconds left. I got to ask you this here. Shall I go to my iPad? You posted on Facebook March 28th. Everybody keeps asking me questions about Diddy's new school. I'm going to give it to you straight up, no chaser. You don't get no pass because you Diddy. Homie that you partnered up with is a sucker, Dr. Steve Perry. Kids are not vodka bottles or velour suits, so you can't just jump into the game from the sidelines with blindfolds on and make some quick cash. I'm watching every single step. If you make kids pawns in your little experiment, I'm coming for your neck.
facts. Where the camera at so I can look straight up. And it's point blank period. Just because you work in hip hop and you have made some money off of the community for a bunch of things does not mean that you have an opportunity to be able to engage in education. Just because you started one charter school somewhere and there's a bunch of narratives around it, but I'm not going to put you on blast because we ain't got facts in front of us right now, does not mean you're going to get a free pass. When you're talking about teaching and learning, you cannot use the language of high expectations. You can't say, oh, we're going to just make it better. You can't say, oh, these schools are so awful. Let me give you an alternative. You got to describe to me what that alternative is. You got to tell me what you're going to do by those young people. You're not going to make money off of young people on my watch, and I'm watching every single step. I will critique every single step because it's been done historically for a very long time, and it's over. The time for that is over. We're going to give folks the pedagogical work, which is, don't tell me about high expectations, tell me what you're going to do by those young people. I don't want you to talk about how you're going to give a better alternative. You got to describe those alternatives to me. You got to show us that you're really about young people and not playing games with numbers. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and I ain't taking nothing back.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll simply have a debate real soon. Him, Steve Perry, and Diddy. All right, the book is called For White Folks Who Teach in the Hood, and the rest of y'all too. Christopher Emdin, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Kickstart your day at 7 and get the news you need from the perspective you want. News 1 Now with Roland Martin every weekday morning at 7 on TV 1.